Hello, and welcome to the Tuning In podcast. I'm Dana Evans, your inner voice and emotional support coach. In this podcast, we explore the deep wisdom that lives in our bodies, emotions, and inner voice. Together, we'll shed the layers that no longer serve us, creating space to tap into the flow of life and experience true ease. So, are you ready to join me? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. Today, we are going to dive deeper into the topic of the freeze response, and specifically functional freeze and how that may show up in your life. I have got to tell you all, I recorded an episode about functional freeze a little while ago. Every single week, I get reports from my podcast host of how many downloads we had for different episodes. Every single week, I have downloads for the episode about functional freeze. That says that you all are enjoying that content and want to hear more. Just for reference, that's episode 147. Called Navigating Functional Freeze, Numbness, and Emotional Overwhelm. That is by far my most downloaded episode of the year. So clearly this is a topic that is of interest and one that I can share more about. We're going to do that today. So last Sunday, John and I went to a concert. Her name is Sierra Farrell, and she's a country folk, a little yodeling vibe artist. She's very quirky and I freaking love her. We had so much fun. Before the concert, we had gone on a bike ride. John is training for a trail marathon in September, so he's doing a lot of running. I am not, but I like to bike with him. And on Sunday, he did a 20-mile run. I joined him for the second half and did a 10-mile bike ride. I got back from that bike ride and it absolutely wrecked me. I got what I believe was a migraine. I had to go lay in the dark for 2 hours. My whole system was overloaded from the heat and the sun. If you have not been to Santa Fe, I just can't explain how intense the light is here. I'm coming from Colorado, and of course in Colorado, we have a ton of sunshine and it's light and it's bright, but there's something about Santa Fe. I think part of it is like our house right now, we're still working on the landscaping and the light is reflecting off the cement and off of the dirt. And when I was on the bike ride, it was reflecting, we were exposed. It was so much stimulation for my eyes that I think it triggered the migraine plus the heat and the exhaustion. It was just overload for my system. So there's one room in my house where it's dark. Only one. And it's the guest room, and I have blackout curtains in that room. And so I am able, when I need to recover, when I need to hermit, when I don't feel well, that's like my recovery room. So when I got back from the bike ride, the migraine was triggered. I went into that room, pulled the shades, and just put a cover over my eyes and laid in the dark. It was really intense. I was talking to a friend at one point, and she was saying, yeah, it makes sense as to why the original homes in this area were adobe structures with these little small windows, because when you come in from the outside, you want to be cocooned and protected from the light. You actually want your house to be dark, which is totally different than what most of us think. And even moving here, I was really concerned about how light my house would be, how many windows there are. And now, like, I'm in my bedroom right now where I record my podcast. And it's not freaking dark. I have all the blinds closed, except we have these 3 little windows that are high up that don't have coverings. So even with the rest of the blinds closed, our bedroom is light. Our living room is light. Our kitchen is light. My office is light. And our bathroom is so light and bright. There's only that one little place to escape. We need to remember that we don't only want to seek the light. We need the balance of darkness. This should probably be the topic of this episode. But I've already done the intro. We're going to talk about freeze response. So maybe I'll do another episode about this. But yes, we are light beings. Yes, we are light. And the shadow the darkness, the retreat is equally valuable and it's needed. If we're only in the light bright all the time, our systems get overloaded. For me, it triggered a migraine. It's just not balanced. If we're only rising and we're not rooting, we're out of balance. And we're always looking for the harmony in our bodies, the harmony with nature, and the harmony of the light and the dark. And we do this with our emotions. I always say that in order to experience the high highs in a sustainable way, we have to also be willing and able to experience the low lows in a sustainable way. Because so often people come to me and say, I don't want to go into my emotions. I don't want to go into the lows. I'm afraid I'll get stuck there. But I do want to feel better. My response is, the more you're willing to go into the lows, the less scary you make them, right? The less wrong that you make them, the more you'll be able to be with them, knowing that they're passing through. As you're comfortable with that, on the other end of that pole are the experiences of joy and bliss. Guess what? You don't need to be in a joy, blissed out state at all times. I think that's why people do drugs because they're trying to hit that state. That's not sustainable either. I don't really know anything about drugs personally, but from my understanding is that people want that high and they want that euphoric feeling that the drug gives them. But guess what? It always comes with a come down, a crash. And guess what? We freaking hate that feeling, that crash. And so what happens? They want another high. This is my very basic, very uninformed understanding of drugs. Obviously, it does things to the brain, dopamine and such, but I'm just thinking that's a really elementary way to see what's going on. Why do people seek out the euphoria of the drug? Because they have these dark, heavy emotions inside that they're afraid of and terrified of and don't want to look at and want to avoid. So much of what we do buffering, whether it's drugs or alcohol or social media or binge watching TV for these endless periods of time, it comes from this unconscious or conscious desire to avoid what is happening in the body. What happens is we end up in this state, we're constantly feeling anxious, or constantly feeling uneasy, or constantly feeling this discomfort in the body. It starts to get really overwhelming. When we're so overwhelmed by it, our whole system can shut down. And the shutting down is a freeze response. Ding, ding, ding. We linked topics. I'm so proud. So I think we're pretty well versed as a culture now of burnout and what happens when we push too hard, too fast, too long, and our whole system crashes and burns. And then you get extreme fatigue, exhaustion. You have no oomph. You have no gumption. You have no adrenaline. You have no gas in the tank that's going to get you going. So that's that burnout side. Functional freeze and the freeze response in general can end up feeling like the burnout. I don't know if they're both connected, but I do know that I've experienced both and they can feel very similar. One can be from overdoing, the other can be from some emotional trigger. I was reading a little bit more about it, and one of the things I found really interesting was this article, which I'll link in the show notes. It said, the freeze response is designed to be momentary, right? So this happens with animals where you can see it in nature. If you run up on a bunny, the bunny might freeze and then catches itself and it shakes and then it runs away. So while the freeze response is designed to be momentary, individuals often find themselves persistently engaging in activities such as pushing themselves, seeking approval, overworking, overthinking, effectively overriding their natural physiological responses. It says humans have a remarkable capacity for adaptation, sometimes to the detriment of their well-being. So this whole idea of being in the freeze response is we're able to push through even when internally our whole body and system, our nervous system, everything is shutting down. and saying, whoa, we need to stop for a second so we can recalibrate. But instead of acknowledging that, instead of being able to tune into that and hear the body, we keep pushing. To me, that's where the burnout and the freeze overlap. So where the overlap here could be with the freeze response and adrenal fatigue, which is in that kidney area where the adrenals are housed, that's where burnout happens. When we're in the freeze response, when our body is saying, hey, we need to stop, and we tend to push ourselves through, as this quote said, pushing themselves, seeking approval, overworking, and overriding their natural physiological responses. To me, that's how we're overlapping with burnt out energy, adrenal fatigue, and ending up in a freeze response. Interesting, huh? Yes, we're adaptive beings. Yes, we're really good at pushing through. And to what benefit or detriment is that happening? I actually talked to a friend the other day who had told me she had this severe migraine and took client calls all day because she was going out of town, and she's like, I don't think I can reschedule these people again. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious, look how strong we are and how much we can push through. And also we have to wonder, is that really serving us in the long run? So when we're looking at the freeze, it can happen one of two ways. The reason I brought up this concert and how fun the concert was, even though I had this tough day, we had this bike ride, I had this migraine, I crashed, I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, please don't let this be like my last concert. Miraculously, thankfully, my body was able to recover. I gave it ample time to rest and restore. I didn't drink any alcohol. I literally went to the concert and brought my Element hydration pack. And I ordered a water there, and I poured my Element. And so my cocktail at the concert was an Element hydration pack because I wanted to stay migraine free. I brought my Loop little earplugs to minimize the noise. Like, I was really looking out for myself. And because of that, I was able to have a really fun time. There's another loop. We've just closed another loop. I opened with the concert. I took you on a very long story. We've just closed the concert loop. The reason I was afraid that it would look like the last concert is because earlier in the month, we went to another concert. This was at the very end of July. That day, y'all, I was in a freeze response. When you're really shut down, you can function. So a lot of times people in freeze response are silently suffering because they're able to show up to work and they're able to engage, but internally they're like very disconnected from what's going on. You might experience this, or like you're able to, quote, turn on when you're out in the world, and then you come home and you completely shut down and you're like dead to the world. You just can't function because you use all of your energy in the external world. Or you're able to have conversations, but you're not emotionally connecting to anything. You're numb. Your body is shut down to feeling because it's been overwhelmed. So what that looked like for me is I was stuck scrolling on my phone. This is a good sign if you're like just sitting there stuck and zoning out. I get clients saying that all the time, like, I'm stuck. I'm just like stuck on the couch. I'm stuck on my phone. I can't break out of it. So that's what was happening to me. John went on his run, and then he was going to come home and we were go to the concert. I was like, okay, I'm going to rev myself out. So I like got ready for the concert, went there. Band is playing all this music, and I am literally standing there, not moving, staring ahead. All of this music is happening, and I can't even pretend to care. I wasn't mad. I wasn't angry. I was completely shut down. I was unaffected by the music. And I think that's really interesting because music has a way of breaking us out in a lot of ways and like shifting our energy. But my poor system was so shut down that I could not be engaged. And John was like, what the hell is going on? He thought I was mad at him. I'm like, I am not mad. I just have nothing. I am empty. I'm dead inside. That's what it feels like sometimes. I'm saying all of these things and I'm telling them to you in story so that you can get a sense of when it's happening. Because let me tell you, even though I've gone through this many times, even though I'm very aware of this concept, I didn't really realize what was happening until the next day. At the time, I thought, man, I'm just really tired. I didn't connect. Whoa, I'm in a freezer. I like to talk about this because sometimes if you're aware of it, you can help break yourself out of it. Not to go suddenly be like extremely productive and social and have the best day ever, but to get your nervous system into that green zone again so it's feeling safe and it can start to regulate itself, because it can take time to break out of this. Usually, when you're in that mode, what that types of things you're going to experience are, like I said, being stuck on your zoning out of choice. So if that's YouTube videos or watching TV shows and movies until you're just like completely dead, it just feels terrible. Or stuck scrolling on social media. It's like post after post, and you think to yourself, this doesn't feel good. I don't want to be doing this, but you can't break out of it. I think of it as you're stuck on a treadmill in a loop where you're looping and looping and looping. And what's happening is, more likely than not, there is something under the surface that freaked your system the heck out. And it went into survival mode. It was like, whoa, this is too much. Either it was a trigger, it brought up something consciously or unconsciously that's like some sort of trauma or emotional struggle inside, or you were overexposed to something that your system wasn't ready to process, or you heard something that you didn't want to hear. It can completely tip us way far. When our system is really out of balance, it can go into freeze response irrationally, I would say. Your mind would say, that shouldn't trigger that. But if your system's out of balance, like anything can throw it off. My system's been pretty in balance, and it still can happen because we're humans and we have stuff. So I didn't realize what had happened. But now I look back, or the next day even, I look back and I was like, oh, I was feeling numb. I was feeling emotionless. I was feeling cold. John can attest to the cold part. I was stuck in non-feeling. So I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I wasn't happy. It was that total numb state. I was scrolling on my phone. I could only do the bare minimum, and I felt like I had no energy. I was exhausted. But if I had to take a call that day, I would have been able to turn on for the call, but it would have been not real, right? It's got like artificial on. And so that's why a lot of times we can't tell if someone is in that response, is because from the outside, they look okay. But inside is where the struggle is, the disconnect, the shutdown. So you can even check in with yourself. Am I showing up and doing the things, but internally it's, what's the point? I don't feel anything. This doesn't feel happy or sad or exciting. There's no spark. Like, these are all signs that your system is in that shutdown mode. It's really valuable to understand what it looks like so you can notice it in yourself. Moving on, some of the ways that we can move out of that. Sometimes just talking to get to the core of it. I was working with a client the other day who came to me and said, I am shut down. She knew that she was shut down and was stuck. Like, she's like, I keep scrolling. I'm watching too many shows and I'm just like stuck on the couch and it doesn't feel good. And I want to point out that there is always a point of, this might feel good and be serving you until it doesn't. So an indicator that you're stuck in that cycle is like, the show might feel good. Like, you watch a few episodes, it feels good. It's a positive experience. It's serving you. And then you fall in the rut of, and now I can't stop. And now we're in that shutdown mode. And so she was super aware, and I can't get out of it. We're talking and moving through things. Then all of a sudden, we get to the core of some big emotional things that were under the surface, some big fears, some big doubts, some big things that were previously unacknowledged. And I asked her, I said, did you know about this, or is this just coming through live as we're talking? She's, no, I was definitely burying this. I did not know that this was present within me. With that awareness, what came with it was a surge of emotion. I often see this with that freeze is we go from feeling numb to like an overwhelm of emotion because it's been suppressed and pushed down and hidden so deeply that we don't even know it's there. But by starting to access the body, by starting to talk through, okay, where is that coming from? Like, what's happening underneath that inner voice? What do you have to say about that? By inquiring to the body in a different way, all of a sudden, these things start to bubble to the surface because we're creating a safe space for them. When that happens, dun, 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 we pop the bubble. So that person went from feeling numb to actually feeling pretty sad. On the other side of that, we didn't really do anything with it at that moment. It's like we just had to break the bubble of numbness. Then she was able to come into an emotion, which is always a better experience than numb. Like I was mentioning earlier, so much of our lives we spend living in this constant state of like anxious, numb, and we're just frozen there. And it's like this constant discomfort, but we're not able to get below the surface. Whenever you're feeling super anxious, it's always an indicator that you need to go deeper because anxiety is a mask. It's a faux motion. It's covering for something that's under the surface that's actually what needs to be processed. When you process that, the anxiety dissipates. So she was also feeling a lot of anxiety and discomfort and like unease and stuck. And so we were able to pop the bubble. We were able to get into sadness. And then she got to just sit with that and actually follow some joy. From that shift, it's really interesting to see like the energetics, but other things started falling into place in her life just by acknowledging that thing that happened, that thing that was underneath the surface. Then we can start to take more active steps. From that place, you can have a different conversation once you burst the bubble. You're able to make different decisions because another sign of you being in that freeze state is like really feeling unable to make a decision. It's, I don't know. So we have to burst the bubble before we make the decision. And then other actions will start to take form once you're on the other side of that. So that's one really positive way to access and break the functional freeze is just by going back into the body and saying, whoa, what's happening? We have to like throw the phone aside, close the computer and step outside if you can, because nature is always going to help bring us back. And we come back to the body. If you have someone, a coach, a friend even, to just talk through things until you can get to the core of that emotion, it's really supportive. So on the body side, another really useful way to get out of the freeze response is movement. But we have to be really mindful here because a lot of times, if you remember, this overworking, seeking approval, pushing yourself, overthinking, overdoing can be a side effect of being in the freeze response, pushing through the response. We don't want to lean into that. Freeze needs movement, but it doesn't need force because it's actually pushing back against the force that it's feeling. Freeze response is coming as a side effect of overwhelm, pressure, intensity. So it's like the shutdown of I cannot compute. It shuts down because there's too much input, too much going on. So when we're wanting to ease out of it, we don't want to do it through force. Like I generally wouldn't recommend going on a run or going to an intense HIIT class or even a really intense hot yoga class because that can actually push you further into the response because what you're saying is I am not listening to you, body. You're asking me to stop and to slow down and I'm pushing through and I'm ignoring you. So we want to show our body that we're listening and we're aware. So things that can help are getting outside. If you're in a freeze response, remember you're going to be shut down. So that also means that all of your senses are numbed. It's crazy. I've experienced this for myself, but also with working with clients. Like, they will be in the freeze response and we move through it. We go through the emotional wave, right? Because again, you're on the numb, freeze, anxious side. The emotion is building, but we're shutting it down. But instead, so we get stuck there. Instead, we ride up the wave. We feel the emotion. We crest the emotion. We pop the bubble. Everything floods out and you come onto the other side of calm ease. On that other side, so often I hear people say, oh my God, I just realized how sore my back is. Oh my God, I'm terribly thirsty. Oh my goodness gracious, I'm cold. That was all there before, but we were shut down. So your senses were numb, so you couldn't even access what was happening in your body. That is the extent to a freeze response. That is what can be happening. It's this extreme disassociation from our own bodies, right? It's separation from self because what is happening in self feels insurmountable. It feels like something that cannot be dealt with. It feels scary. It feels unknown. It feels like this shadow darkness that we're afraid to touch. So let me just separate from this and completely disassociate. The problem with that is it's temporary. We know that. It only temporarily works. Then the body has to work harder and get louder and louder to get you to pay attention, which can also often cause like injuries, unexplained pains, soreness and tightness in the jaw, and all these like migraines. All these big things can show up. I see that with people who spend a lot of time in that freeze response is they also have a lot of really extreme body symptoms. It's crazy. So going outside is really nice. Putting your feet on a warm rock, feeling the sun on your skin, listening for the sounds of nature, engaging your senses in a really gentle way. Even better if you can go outside and sit on a rocking chair. Anytime you can do this rocking, swaying, I'm doing this right now as I'm talking to you, rocking and swaying is really going to help. Think about a baby, right? When a baby's crying and upset, what do? We rock them. And we can do that for ourselves as well. So being outside, engaging your senses. What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you feel? And if you can't feel something, give yourself something to feel. Cold water on your wrists can be really nice. Standing on a warm rock can be really nice. Like something not stressful. Even like holding a cold beverage. Like, where can I bring my senses back? You can rub your legs. We did this last week where you rub your hands together really fast and then you feel for the tingles, right? Can you see how all of these things are bringing sensation back into your body in a really gentle way? We're not trying to be like, let's find the big, heavy, scary emotion right away and burst it. No, we're just trying to bring ourselves back into our bodies gently. Another part is even noticing, what is my body temperature? Am I cold? Am I warm? Do I need a blanket? Do I need to shed a layer? Am I like sweating? You could brush your hair. That just came up. And something really gentle, brush your hair, squeezing the bottoms of your feet. Bilateral movement is really helpful when we're in a nervous system shutdown. So think about walking is bilateral movement in a way, right? It's like step. It's carrying that consistent rhythm. So think about how rocking has that rhythm. It's like back and forth. Walking can have that too. It's one step, two step, one step, two step. And then tapping on your body. So your vagus nerve actually moves down the center of your sternum and to the right. And so you can just gently press around the rib cage there and tap it. Then you can cross your hands. So your right hand to your left collarbone and your left hand to your right collarbone. And you just tap, tap opposites. Again, this is that really rhythmic tapping. It's bringing you back into your body. It's rhythm. It's accessing where that vagus nerve is. And it's bringing sensation back to your system. I really like that one. Another one is lying on your back with your heels on the bed or on the floor, and you just flap your feet forward and back so that the whole body is rocking forward and back, forward and back. You can also then take your feet side to side, side to side. So there are these really consistent, gentle, rhythmic things that help. One that I like to do as well is humming. So again, bringing energy back into the body. So go or ah, and you can do that while tapping ah, ah. All of these are really beautiful practices. Another symptom of the response, though, is self-isolation. So if you're isolating and avoiding people, it might be harder for someone to reflect back to you. Like I was isolating that day. Had I called my mom or someone, she probably would have said, "Hey, are you in a freeze response?" And I'd be like, "Oh my God, maybe." I may have been able to receive that. I may not have, to be completely honest. When you're shut down like that, you can't always receive. But point being, you may be able to get a reflection, but you may not. You may be able to notice it on your own and you may not. But the beauty is all of these practices are going to help even on the other side of the freeze response. I don't really know exactly why I got in it. I suspect I have an idea. And it was only a day. The next day I felt quite a bit better. But when I realized that I had been in the response, what did? I did all of the practices that we just spoke of. Because it's not usually like you're either in it or out of it. If you're in it, it means your system's probably been shut down. And all of a sudden it's peaking, it's shut down. So we want to ease out of that with all of these really beautiful practices. I've told you about this many times, but I love the Workout Witch. She has a lot of movements and practices that you can use to help with this nervous system shutdown, even adrenal fatigue, freeze response, functional freeze, whatever we're calling it. They're all definitely associated with each other. Her videos and courses are really helpful. I'll put a link to those in the show notes. And I've just taken on a lot of them from doing the program a few times, and then I just do what feels good in the moment. So remember, if you're in the freeze response, it means that you're probably disassociated. Your senses are definitely suppressed and numbed. You're probably operating in some sort of avoidance, shutdown, stuck in a cycle that you feel like you can't break out of. You may be functioning okay in the external world, but internally you feel very disassociated and you're having trouble feeling feelings of joy. You're having no momentum. There feels like there's no go energy. And yet you may still keep trying to push through and avoiding the rest that is required. Remember, whenever we're scrolling or streaming or doing any of our destructive behaviors that are meant to protect us, but they end up being destructive, any of those buffering behaviors, what you're really doing is resisting rest. So when we're avoiding rest, it can also put us in the freeze response. When we're avoiding going into our bodies, we can be in that freeze response. Freeze response doesn't mean you need to move to get out of it. It might mean that you need rest, but you're avoiding the rest, or you need quiet time with your body. I did an episode recently about the difference between meditation and emotional clearing. You might need either of those. But if you're avoiding that, then you're stuck and feeding that freeze response. So remember, those are all signs and symptoms that's happening. And the way to move ourselves gently out of it is by doing just that, being gentle, activating our 5 senses, reconnecting, like bringing our forms back into our bodies. So you've disassociated, you've detached from your own body. We need to come back, and you can do that by touching, squeezing, hugging, tapping, rocking, being in nature, then using temperature and sensation to activate sensation in your body again. Then continuing these practices to make sure that you fully bring yourself out of the response. At that point, you can then look at what may have triggered it and get deeper into the body and into the emotions using an actual emotional clearing practice. I'll link Moving Dense Emotion audio that I have. That would be a really supportive one to use at that moment. Then you can get deeper into the emotion so that we actually move that emotion out so it doesn't keep causing you to go into a freeze response. We can be triggered into a freeze response, just like we can be triggered into an anger response. But the trigger still remains the trigger, and the trigger is this emotion, this sensation within your own body that needs to be neutralized effectively. We need to address it, find it, face it, feel it, free it, so that it can be seen, heard, acknowledged, the lessons can be learned from it, and it can circulate back through your body so it's not this big stuck thing. So there's a little deeper information here about the freeze response, about what we can do with it, about what it means, and how to really address it so that you're not stuck there. And if you are feeling like, oh my gosh, I've been in a perpetual freeze response, because it does happen, like we can get stuck in that state for weeks and months. If you feel like that is happening to you and you're not sure how to get out of it on your own, I would love to support you in that. I am taking clients for September. If that's something you want to work on deeper, we can do a single session. I have those. I'll put those links in the show notes. I love doing a single session. It will get you out of the freeze response. But if you've been in the freeze response for a long time, it's likely that you're going to need more than one session, because we have to get deeper to the core of what is triggering this. If you've been in it for a while, there's a lot of safety that we need to rebuild in your body so that you can have a more steady emotional hygiene practice so that you're not constantly falling back into that response. Just know that I've worked with many clients on this, and I've done a lot of this experiential work on myself and with other coaches for me. I can definitely help you break out of that if that's where you are, and start to really soothe your system again so it feels safe to be and to feel, right? It is a protective mechanism. So when we lean into more trusting our bodies, listening to our bodies, resting when we need, right? Here we go back to avoiding burnout and not pushing beyond our limits constantly. Then we're teaching our systems and our bodies, hey, you don't have to completely freeze and shut down, because I'm looking out for you and I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to give you rest when you need. I'm going to process emotions when they come up. We're not going to be avoiding rest. We're not going to be avoiding emotions. We're not going to be trying to numb. We're actually going to feel things and move through them. And it's going to be a really safe and nurturing experience. I love this work. I would love to support you on this. And even if you just want a single session with me to see what it's all about, let's do it. Let's get on a call. Let's do it together. If you just want to experience your own emotional clearing, I have a free audio for you to do that as well. So beyond that, always you can find me on my vitamin D newsletter, which I absolutely love, where we talk deeper about these topics. I like to tell a lot of stories in the newsletter. And of course, you can find me on Instagram. So I hope this episode was supportive. The more we talk about this, the more we normalize it, the more we can identify it within ourselves and even help other people identify it with gentle inquiry, because it can feel so isolating when you're in that state, and scary and uncomfortable, and feel like you'll never get out of it. But I'm here to tell you and remind you that it is not permanent. You're not meant to be in this shutdown state. Animals experience this state, but they literally have a shaking mechanism to break them out of it. They use their bodies, and we can do that as well. And so I'm here to support you on that path and to get you back into your body and into your senses and into, like we talked about last week, the language of your body. And emotion and sensation is the language of your body. And when we learn that language, it's okay to fall into a freeze response. I had that a few weeks ago. I was in it for a day, but it didn't become, and it didn't take me out of my life for days and weeks on end. I was able to catch it, move out of it. And that is what I want for you as well. With that, thank you as always for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Tuning In podcast. Thank you for joining me in another episode of the Tuning In podcast. If you loved this episode, please rate and review it or share it with a friend. If you want to go deeper into the realm of emotions and learn the language of your body, check out my audio course, Emotions Decoded, at alignful.com/audio. As always, you can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans. See you next week.